Hello, and welcome to Street Aesthete. This is the show where we explore street view coverage of a noteworthy location, looking out for beautiful architecture and stunning scenery, while I amuse myself by remarking on what we see. And in today's episode, we are visiting the Netherlands. We are going to its capital, Amsterdam, and we're going to start off by dropping in at the central station, and we're going to see where our eyes lead us. Immediately, we come across this extremely impressive building, the train station. We have the characteristic red brick of this part of the world. Some fabulous masonry here, some relief sculpture, some unusual symbols around the clock face. In fact, I believe these are the cardinal directions in Dutch. We've got Zeld there, Noord, I presume. I thought for a moment we were looking at some sort of occult symbol, but no, everything making sense there. And a more normal clock face here, and just look at the detail that we can see at the top of the tower here. A beautiful sloped roof. The crest, I presume, of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Wonderful. Now if we take a step in this direction, we can see that the facade of this building extends for quite a long way in this direction, and not so much this way. And actually, when we look over this way, we start to see some much newer, uglier construction that just doesn't fit in. So Amsterdam City Council, I suggest that you bulldoze all of that and build some new beautiful buildings, because we don't need anything like that. We need more like this. And there's an awful lot to take in here. Amsterdam is a city that is just absolutely full of wonderful architecture. It really is a feast for the eyes. I have visited it myself on more than one occasion, and I probably don't need to tell you too much about the place, because it's not unlikely that you might also have visited, or you have at least heard of it. And being one of the major Western European capitals, it is a fairly famous city. See, this isn't too bad. We've got a modern building here alongside the older canal houses, but this actually, we can see, has taken a lot of the aesthetic cues from the neighbouring buildings. These could almost be, although they're actually part of one and the same facade, they could be units of canal houses, although not quite as beautifully decorated, of course. And what a stunning top to a church there, the dome and the twin towers either side. Really wonderful. Well, there are lots of different directions that we could go in, and it's difficult to know which one to take. Which one leads my eye the most? I think it's this street here, which is probably a canal, in fact. That's the way that is calling me most, but actually I would like to take a closer look at some of these over here. So we're really going to be taking our time and just taking in as much of the architecture as we please in this episode, which is probably going to run over a couple of episodes on the Street Aesthete channel. Let's get onto this bridge and take a closer look at these here. Slightly darker brick we can see here, not so much red. I associate really the red brick more with places like London and Belgian cities, whereas this much darker brick you do tend to see in the Netherlands. And it's very much broken up here by the whiter limestone cladding and these highlights in between. But sometimes Dutch buildings can be guilty of displaying a whole blank face of rather dark, ugly brick. A little bit of highlight and decoration is needed, I think, to improve the facade, and it's proving a little bit difficult, isn't it, to get a great view of these. And that is also very inviting. That's the thing about visiting large cities like this one, and why I've tended to avoid doing it so far on the channel. I have visited London on a couple of occasions, but London is the place that I know the best. It's where I grew up and where I still live. So I was able to make some targeted expeditions through specific parts of the town that I wanted to share with you. And here we start to get a better view, I would say. And we'll just scroll, or rather pan, along these canal houses and take them in. It's great to see the variety in shades of brick here, the variety of gables that we can see. We've got a very classical triangular gable here. Then this that I think very much more of as a Dutch style, and rather stylized in fact, in that it's very sort of pared down. We don't have any extra ornamentation, it's literally just the shape, but we can certainly forgive it for that when alongside all of these other buildings. Some beautiful shutters here, being the distinguishing feature of this facade. And a beautiful bell tower over there. And actually something else I just wanted to point out about particularly these canal houses here is that, as we can see, they're slightly off kilter. They're all leaning a little bit, some more than others certainly, and that's because, as you may know, Amsterdam was built on a peat bog, essentially, on very swampy ground, and it stands on piles of submerged wooden logs. And so that ground is liable to move, and that's why sometimes you get this subsidence and the buildings start to lean one way or the other. The 3 X's is the traditional symbol, I believe, of Amsterdam. We've got, I would say, perhaps a relatively new building here with some Romanesque design features, but really it's not quite as appealing, I would say, as this sort of thing, this more canal house style building. And I know I've gone in a different direction to the one that I said I would, but, well, the eye knows what it wants, and right now I'm keen to take in this row. What is this hideous thing doing here in between? I mean, look, you know, if you just take it all in at a sweep, it doesn't really draw your attention too much, but, you know, when you actually take a look at the detail, we've got this wonderful facade here, the beautiful brickwork, the details, and then this, look at this. This is trash. You can knock this down and build something better in between, no doubt. Ugly dark brick, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about actually. Just no ornamentation whatsoever, no distinguishing features. Just terrible. You know, compare it to this. It's a travesty that this beautiful Baroque detail here stands next to this trash. And yeah, another fairly new facade. But then what this one actually has is a feature that I wondered if I might have cause to talk about, which is this has got a hook and winch system coming off of the top of it, which would have been used, and probably still is used for that matter, for hauling up large items like sofas, pianos, that sort of thing into the upper stories of the building. Because of course, many of the buildings in Amsterdam, many of the residential houses are very tall and narrow, and have such narrow staircases that getting large items up them is not really feasible. And that's because of how expensive it was to own any single plot of land in this city. And so people who could afford a house would build upwards on their narrow plot. And do we think these are some large wheels of cheese in the window here? Kaas speciaalzaak, yeah, kaas is cheese. And 2 very distinguished buildings here. We've got this wonderful turret, which feels somehow French to me, especially with this mansard roof. And then this very ornate, very opulent facade here. And I particularly enjoy the detail of the red window frames that we can see here. And a very classical ground floor facade meeting the street there. Really wonderful, a fantastic row of buildings. This is, again, something more modern. Feeling a little bit out of place. It somewhat spoils the continuity of this row, I would say, but from afar, it doesn't spoil the effect, it has to be said. And what have we got over on this side? Yes, not bad at all. Classical features. These little dormer windows I really like. And we will go to the end. I'm very conscious that there was a lot back over behind this row that we're missing out on. But of course it's going to be impossible in a single video, let alone even a series of videos, to do a complete building survey of even one small part of Amsterdam. It really has such a rich architectural history. But we shall press on, letting our eyes lead us. And that, I think, is the first time we've seen the Dutch flag. I'm always on the Street Aesthete channel on the lookout for the national flag of the country we're exploring. And worth mentioning here also, because we can see it quite clearly, that something the Dutch do particularly well is road infrastructure, thinking of cyclists and pedestrians very much. And of course we can see the lines of the tram system here, and here's one of the trams. If you've ever visited Amsterdam, or any Dutch city for that matter, you'll notice that the cyclists are absolutely ubiquitous, and indeed we've got many bicycles standing here waiting for their riders to return. A very distinguished square, although I would say it is somewhat lacking in the traditional Amsterdam canal houses that the city is famous for. Nonetheless, there's still lots to see here, and actually this building is, as we can see from this gable, rather like a very large version of the canal houses that we see. I'm not sure if we can quite navigate with ease through this square. I'm hoping to get over here and take a look at this church and then probably actually penetrate into this neighbourhood here. We ought to be walking alongside one of the canals, I think, to really take in the canal houses. This looks as though it could perhaps be a city hall, a museum. This is the Koninklijk Paleis, Amsterdam. Brilliant, really great. And we can see here a large array of bells in the tower. I suspect that this building probably has a carillon, which is a musical instrument operated via keyboard, where each key is attached to a pitched bell, almost like a giant glockenspiel. And it's not unusual when walking around Dutch cities, and indeed French and Belgian cities, and in other countries in the area, to hear recitals of carillon music ringing through the streets. Ooh, now take a look at this. Isn't that fabulous? My eye is always drawn to the red and white stripes that we see here. Not quite white, of course, perhaps a kind of a creamy limestone colour. And just incredible detail here. But also a very appealing symmetry and continuity. Now, I have spoken a few times on this channel about the importance of a built environment in some ways reflecting more natural environments like forests or hills. And so it's important not to have too many straight parallel lines, which of course occur very seldom in nature. And we're getting a little bit close to that sort of thing with the lines that we can see here, but they are very much broken up by all of these alternating red brick and limestone details, as well as the arches. But importantly, the straight line on the very top of the building is broken by these windows. Wonderful. Really, really wonderful. And it does seem as though there's an awful lot of roadwork going on when this coverage was taken. Here we have another just gorgeous building, but it's so much in the shadow of this larger one that you could almost walk straight past it. And I love the way in this city the alleys just take you off in lots of different directions. So many different paths that the eyes and the feet can be led down. And I love the variety actually of the different shades of brick alongside this presumably black painted brick here. Very interesting. This lovely flowery organic design here, and we can see that this part of the building here is almost like a kind of a rounded sun trap style, like a rounded bay window. So I would suspect that this was built in the early 20th century, and indeed perhaps this one as well. The railings over the windows here sort of feel as though they could be from the 1920s and 30s, but actually everything about this building looks even newer perhaps. And yeah, then we have something just ugly like this, which hasn't even attempted to look like the other buildings in the city. You know, if we frame this just right, look at this. It's just so distinct and characteristic. It couldn't be anywhere other than the Netherlands. And all the church spires as well. And then this. Terrible. Bulldoze, build something better. I'm perfectly aware that it isn't really practical to be knocking down buildings left, right and centre, especially when they are abutting more historic buildings. This is just my little fantasy that stuff like this can be got rid of and replaced by, say, something like this, something with a beautiful gable, something with brick, something with a Dutch gable like this with some Baroque features, just something that fits in with the historical character of the city. There's no need for new buildings to be ugly. We're richer now than we've ever been, and yet we just don't seem to have the wherewithal, the interest, perhaps the skill, or even the aesthetic sense to build beautiful things anymore. A little bit stylized perhaps, but it has a beauty of its own. I think that we're just missing a gable here. Very much so, in fact. Yeah, we've got a straight line here, somewhat spoiling. Although we do see that in some of the older facades here as well. So I suppose it's forgivable. Indeed, it's far from the worst facade that we can see. Shall we venture into this pedestrian street? I think not. I would really like to get towards one of the canals, and as we can see, we're just a few streets over parallel, but we really could spend all day going down each and every street and enjoying all there is to see. And to be honest, there's no reason not to. This is the Street Aesthete channel, so I'm going to spend as much time today looking at Amsterdam as I please. I didn't note that as we were passing it earlier because the tram's in the way, but we can see at least the upper portion of this facade. And the thing that really stands out to me about this one is these very small limestone highlights that we can see. And unusually perhaps, some extra bricking in around the curvature of the gables. But I don't object to it in the least, actually, because the shape of the gable is retained, and as a matter of fact, the brickwork has been done very beautifully with this rotated square motif. And we're now coming back towards the train station where we started, and we'll perhaps now get to enter the neighbourhood that I was looking at to the southwest of the station. It's an onslaught for the senses, it's just fantastic. Less so this. I know you can do better, Amsterdam. And I think the thing that really does cover a multitude of architectural sins is the fact that so many of the facades are so narrow, because, let's be honest, these are not particularly beautiful. They're rather boring, really. Nothing particularly distinguished about the brickwork, apart from perhaps the perpendicular bricks above the windows, but there's a lot of uniformity here. However, because it's so narrow, it doesn't dominate the facades of the street, and indeed, if you don't like this one, there's going to be something next to it, and something next to that, and something next to that, and so the eye is always led along a row, and you can take it in its entirety, rather than having to focus on something that is wide and unappealing. And here I think is a good place to see some real contrast between the old and the new. So we have, of course, this wonderful row of varied but very characteristically Dutch buildings. And speaking of not having too many parallel lines, we do have, in these older but beautiful facades, quite a lot of straight lines on top, although it must be said this one is broken by this lovely arch. But they are not all quite at the same elevation, so that we do have the broken line. It's not too much unnatural straightness. But on the other side of this, looking out from these buildings, you'll be looking at this. Now look. There's nothing you can tell me that will make me think, oh yes, I see what you mean. This is going to be beautiful. I think this is still under construction, perhaps. But I can just tell immediately. I mean, look at this. The grey building material, it's just hideous. It's horrid. It really is horrid. Yeah, I've got nothing good to say about any of this. It is my opinion, strongly held, not one that you will be able to shift me from, that each of these buildings here, 1, 2, 3, should be knocked down, and in their place something beautiful should be built, like this perhaps, like a row of canal-style houses, like a beautiful church. Now, I do understand that this is alongside the railway. We can see that the trains will be coming into the station hall there. But just because a building is next to a railway doesn't mean that it has to be ugly. In fact, we can do a lot to beautify what is inherently a place of infrastructure by adding some beautiful architecture. So we're going to pause here for this episode of Street Aesthete and return next time for the second part of our exploration of Amsterdam. Why not subscribe to the channel to make sure that you don't miss part 2? If you've enjoyed the music that you hear in this video, then take a look at my first channel, which is where I upload all of my original music.